The grand halls of the Varkathian palace echoed with silence, a cold, merciless kind of quiet that carried no warmth or welcome. The towering pillars, once symbols of an unshakable rule, now stood as nothing more than ancient witnesses to a fate long sealed. Before the throne, on his knees, was a warrior who had once commanded legions, conquered worlds, and inspired fear across the galaxy. His name was Xal'Rith, the king of the Varkathian Dominion. But now he was just an aging relic, kneeling before the very woman who had once sworn eternal loyalty to him. Queen Seraveth watched him with unreadable golden eyes, her expression sharp as the twin blades resting on her throne's armrests. Her crimson robes shimmered under the dim, bluish glow of the palace's floating lanterns, giving her an almost ethereal appearance. To those who did not know her, she looked regal. To those who did, she looked merciless. Xal'Rith clenched his fists against the cold, metallic floor, his pride warring with desperation. He was not begging. He was a warrior, after all. But he was not above asking for what he had earned. For centuries, he had ruled, defended, and bled for the Empire. He had sacrificed more than any other. And yet, this was how it was going to end. "You are making a mistake," his voice, though hoarse from years of battle, still carried the weight of command. "I have never failed you, Seraveth. Never. And I will not fail now." The queen did not blink. "Your time is over, Xal'Rith." Around them, the High Council of Varkath stood in a semicircle, watching in silence, their faces unreadable. Some had once called Xal'Rith a friend, an ally. Now they merely watched as fate stripped him of everything he had built. Xal'Rith rose to his feet, slow but steady, his towering form still holding the strength of a warrior despite the years wearing him down. "You believe the Dominion no longer needs me, that I am weak, but you forget. My strength was never just my own. It was the strength of all Varkathians. The battles I won were for our people, not for my pride." Seraveth tilted her head slightly, amused. "And now, our people need a new strength, one that does not fade with age, a strength that does not cling to the past." She stood, her presence undeniable, her voice an iron chain that bound the room. "You will leave now, Xal'Rith. You will take your memories, your stories, and your weakness, and you will disappear. If you refuse, I will make sure the last thing you see is your own empire burning in your name." A low murmur swept through the council, but no one spoke against her. None of them had the courage to challenge the queen. A shadow shifted at the edge of the hall. Captain Darius Kane, a human among aliens, watched the scene unfold with cold, calculating eyes. He had known Xal'Rith for years. He had fought beside him, saved his life, and had his own saved in return. The old king was not weak. He had simply become inconvenient. And in the Varkathian Dominion, inconvenience was met with exile, or worse. Darius had seen this before, in human history, in alien history. Power did not care for loyalty. It only cared for who held the sword. Xal'Rith looked around, searching for a single face that might rise in his defense. There was none, not even among those who had once sworn allegiance to him. He exhaled slowly. The rage in his heart was cold, not hot. He should have expected this. With a final glance at Seraveth, he turned and walked toward the exit, his footsteps heavy, his fate seemingly sealed. But as he passed Darius, the human captain did something unexpected. He moved, just slightly, and spoke in a low voice. "Where you go, I go." Xal'Rith halted, glancing at him, searching for mockery. He found none. Before he could reply, a deafening sound shook the palace. A war horn, a signal of change. Seraveth's eyes flickered toward the entrance of the throne room, a glimmer of irritation flashing across her usually emotionless face. The grand doors burst open, revealing the figure of her new mate, the one who would take Xal'Rith's place. A younger, larger warrior, clad in obsidian black armor, stood there, his massive arms crossed over his chest. His face was twisted into a smirk, his gaze mocking as he looked at the fallen king. "Move along, old man," the warrior sneered. "Your time is over." Xal'Rith did not move. Not at first. His eyes, dark and unreadable, locked onto Seraveth's. A silent message passed between them. And then he turned and walked into the darkness of the corridor. Darius followed. Seraveth watched him go, knowing she had won. Or at least she believed she had. But fate had a strange sense of humor, and it was far from finished with them yet. The barren wastelands stretched endlessly under the twin moons of Varkath Prime, a world once rich with history, but now reduced to a forgotten exile ground. It was a place where warriors who had outlived their usefulness were cast away, their names erased from records, their victories turned to dust in the memories of those who once praised them. No one sent to this place ever returned. Xal'Rith stood in the middle of the desolate land, his cloak billowing slightly in the icy wind. His once glorious armor was dented, dulled by time and battle, yet it still carried the presence of a warrior who had never known defeat until now. His body ached. His wounds, both physical and unseen, were deep, but none of it mattered. He had lost everything. His kingdom, his title, his honor. He had seen betrayal before, had even expected it at some point in his long reign, but to be cast aside so easily by the one who had once stood beside him. That was a wound that even time would not heal. Seraveth had not simply removed him from the throne. She had taken everything from him in a way that left no room for doubt. She had erased him before he had even drawn his last breath. A sound of footsteps echoed behind him. Human steps. Deliberate. "You don't have to be here, Captain Kane," Xal'Rith said without turning. "This fate is mine alone." Darius Kane adjusted the strap of his rifle, scanning the horizon. The place looked like a dead planet, but his instincts told him it wasn't as empty as it seemed. "Not much of a retirement home," he muttered, ignoring the alien king's words. Xal'Rith finally turned to look at him, a faint trace of amusement flickering across his tired eyes. "I assume this means you have no intention of leaving." Darius smirked. "I don't do well with abandonment issues, and I have a feeling you're not as finished as they think you are." The Varkathian let out a slow breath, something between a sigh and a chuckle. He had always respected humans for their defiance, for their tendency to stand beside those they called allies, even when it wasn't in their best interest. In all his years of war, he had never met another species quite like them. Perhaps that was why he had allowed a human into his closest circle in the first place. "They are not wrong," Xal'Rith admitted. "I am old. My body is failing. My strength is not what it once was." Darius frowned at the admission. "Strength isn't just about muscle. If it were, your new replacement would be ruling the galaxy by now." The former king's eyes darkened at the mention of Seraveth's new mate. A brute. A warmonger. A warrior with no vision, only violence. The Varkathian Dominion had once been feared, yes, but it had also been stable under his rule. He had not sought unnecessary wars. He had made enemies, but he had also made allies. That balance was about to be lost. He turned away from Darius, gazing at the distance where jagged rock formations rose like broken spires from the ground. Somewhere out there, deep beneath the ruins of this forsaken land, lay something forgotten. Something only a few still whispered about in hushed voices. Darius noticed the change in his expression. "You know something," he said, narrowing his eyes. Xal'Rith hesitated. "There is a legend among my people," he finally said, his voice low, as if speaking too loudly might wake something. "A story of warriors long before my time. It is said that the first rulers of Varkath did not simply claim the throne through strength alone. They had something else. Something greater." Darius raised an eyebrow. "Magic?" Xal'Rith shook his head. "No, power, but not the kind that comes from weapons or brute force. The kind that is inherited, chosen." He turned to Darius, his expression unreadable. Only one ruler was ever worthy of this power before, and it was said that when his time ended, He sealed it away beneath the ruins of this land, to await another. Darius exhaled, crossing his arms. And you think that's you? The former king's expression did not change. I think fate has a cruel sense of humor. The human studied him for a moment before nodding. Then we find it. Xal'Rith chuckled, though it was a dry, hollow sound. It may not even exist. It could be nothing more than a story. Darius shrugged. Well, we're standing on a dead planet. You've been exiled, and I just walked out on an empire that wants us both erased. If there was ever a time to believe in long-lost legends, I'd say it's now. A gust of wind carried the scent of something old, something buried deep beneath the surface. Xal'Rith had spent his life following reason. But now he had nothing left to lose. He turned toward the ruins, his mind set. If fate had truly abandoned him, then he would seek it out and demand answers. Together, they started walking. They did not notice the eyes watching them from the shadows. Nor did they hear the silent transmission being sent back to the Queen. She already knew, and she would not let them succeed. The ruins stretched out before them, jagged remnants of a forgotten age, half buried beneath layers of dust and time. The sky above was a dull shade of gray, choked by swirling clouds that never seemed to part, as if the planet itself had long since surrendered to the fate imposed upon it. Xal'Rith moved with quiet purpose, his gaze scanning the horizon for something only he could recognize. Darius Kane followed closely behind, rifle slung over his shoulder, his boots crunching against brittle rock as they ventured deeper into the remains of what had once been a mighty civilization. The air was thick with something ancient, something unseen but undeniable. Darius had been on countless alien worlds before, but this place felt different. It wasn't just abandoned. It was waiting. He could feel it, and from the way Xal'Rith moved, the former king felt it too. After a long stretch of silence, Darius finally spoke. So what exactly are we looking for? A door. A temple. A big flashing sign that says, "Lost power this way." Xal'Rith didn't answer immediately. He reached out, running a clawed hand over the surface of a massive stone slab, its edges worn by time, but still etched with carvings that seemed almost untouched by erosion. The symbols were old, far older than even his empire. There should be a passage, Xal'Rith murmured, more to himself than to Darius. A vault built beneath these ruins. If the stories are true, it is where the first warlord left the legacy of Varkath. Darius let out a slow breath, glancing around. And if the stories are not true? Xal'Rith finally looked at him, his expression unreadable. Then we are wasting our last moments before the Queen sends something to finish us. Darius smirked. Then we better hurry. The ground beneath them was uneven, filled with cracks where time had split the stone. They moved cautiously, knowing full well that ruins like these often held more than just lost history. But after nearly an hour of searching, nothing revealed itself. There were no hidden doors, no secret switches, nothing that hinted at the legendary power Xal'Rith spoke of. Darius wiped a layer of dust from his face and sighed. You sure your ancestors weren't just really good at making up bedtime stories? Xal'Rith frowned, but before he could respond, something shifted. A low, distant rumbling vibrated beneath their feet. Dust cascaded from the ruins, small rocks tumbling from higher ledges as the ground trembled with life for the first time in centuries. Darius instinctively reached for his weapon, eyes scanning for an unseen threat. Then, with a loud crack, the stone beneath Xal'Rith collapsed. The former king let out a sharp breath as the ground gave way beneath him, pulling him into darkness. Without thinking, Darius lunged forward, grabbing Xal'Rith's arm just before he disappeared entirely into the void. The weight was immense, and for a moment, it felt as if both of them would be swallowed by whatever lay beneath. You've got to lay off the battle rations, old man, Darius grunted, struggling to keep hold. Xal'Rith let out a low growl, his free hand grasping at the crumbling edge of the pit. You should have left me. Darius ignored the protest. Yeah, and miss out on whatever the hell this is. Not a chance. With one final pull, he heaved the Varkathian up, and they both tumbled backward onto solid ground. Dust filled the air, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then, coughing, Darius pushed himself up, looking over the edge. Beneath them, deep in the darkness, something glowed. A faint, pulsing light came from within the pit, casting eerie blue shadows along the jagged walls. It was not natural. Xal'Rith exhaled slowly, staring down into the unknown. We found it. Darius adjusted his rifle. Or it found us. Carefully, they began their descent. The walls were rough, uneven, but manageable. The deeper they went, the more the air changed. It was charged, like static before a storm, a sensation Darius had only felt in the presence of highly advanced alien technology. But this felt alive. At the bottom, the source of the glow became clear. A massive metallic door stood embedded in the stone, its surface smooth and untouched by time. Unlike the rest of the ruins, this had not decayed. It had not aged. Xal'Rith approached, placing his palm against the cold surface. The moment he did, the symbols on the door reacted. Lines of light raced across the metal, intricate patterns shifting as if awakening from slumber. Then, with a loud hiss, the door split down the middle, revealing the deep chamber beyond. Darius tightened his grip on his rifle. I have a really bad feeling about this. Xal'Rith stepped forward, his voice quiet. Then you are paying attention. They entered. Inside, the chamber was unlike anything they had seen before. The walls were covered in flowing symbols, shifting and moving like liquid gold. At the center of the room, a pedestal stood, and atop it, encased in a field of shimmering energy, was the relic. It was not a weapon, not in the traditional sense. It was a crown. Not just any crown. A warrior's crown. A relic from the time of the first warlord. Darius exhaled sharply. Well, that's not what I expected. Xal'Rith stepped forward, his expression unreadable. He had heard the stories, the myths, the legends, but seeing it here, real and untouched, was something else entirely. Before he could reach for it, the air around them shifted. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter, and suddenly, a deep mechanical voice filled the chamber. The worthiness of the fallen shall be tested. The door behind them sealed shut. Darius immediately raised his rifle. Yeah, definitely a bad feeling. The air grew thick, heavy. The glow of the relic pulsed like a heartbeat. Then, from the shadows, something moved. A figure, ancient, armored, massive, stepped forward, its form flickering between solid metal and ethereal energy. It carried no weapons, because it did not need them. This was no simple test. This was a guardian. Xal'Rith clenched his fists. He knew now why no one had ever claimed the relic. Because no one had ever survived the trial. Darius let out a slow breath, rolling his shoulders. You know what? He muttered, tightening his grip on his weapon. I really miss being bored. The guardian's eyes flared. And then it attacked. The chamber erupted into chaos. The guardian lunged forward, its form shifting between solid and spectral, a fusion of ancient technology and something far beyond understanding. It moved with a speed that defied its towering size, a blur of metal and energy streaking across the room. Xal'Rith barely had time to react before a colossal fist, shimmering with raw power, slammed toward him. He dodged at the last possible moment, rolling to the side as the blow shattered the stone floor where he had been standing. Shards of rock exploded outward, the force enough to send dust and debris swirling through the air like a violent storm. Darius was already moving, instincts honed from years of battle taking over. He raised his rifle and fired. A controlled, precise burst aimed directly at the Guardian's center mass. The energy rounds struck true, hitting with enough force to level an armored soldier. But the Guardian didn't even flinch. The bullets passed through it, as if it weren't fully there. It turned its head slightly, as though regarding Darius for the first time, and then it moved. Faster than thought. Darius barely had time to throw himself backward before a wave of raw force erupted from the Guardian's outstretched hand, obliterating the ground where he had been standing. He hit the ground hard, rolling before coming up onto one knee, cursing under his breath. "All right," he muttered, breathing heavily. "So that's not gonna work." Xal'Rith wasn't faring much better. He had seen combat across countless worlds, faced warriors of every species imaginable, but nothing moved like this. It wasn't just fast, it was unpredictable, shifting between states of matter with terrifying precision. One moment it was solid, striking with the force of a collapsing star, and the next it was intangible, letting attacks pass harmlessly through. But Xal'Rith had not come this far to die here. He shifted his stance, watching, waiting. He had spent his entire life studying battle, mastering the movements of enemies, predicting the flow of combat before it even began. The Guardian, for all its power, was still a machine. And machines, no matter how advanced, followed patterns. Darius saw the shift in the old warrior's posture and recognized it instantly. He wasn't just fighting anymore. He was analyzing. Xal'Rith feinted left, drawing the Guardian into an attack, then pivoted at the last second, dodging in a way that forced the creature to momentarily materialize. That was the opening. Darius saw it too. Without hesitation, he switched to explosive rounds and fired. The shot struck just as the Guardian became solid again. This time, the result was different. The force of the blast tore into its chest, sending it staggering backward. It wasn't a killing blow, but it was the first real damage they had done. Xal'Rith moved instantly, pressing the advantage. He surged forward, striking with a force that sent shockwaves through the chamber. His fist connected with the Guardian's head, cracking the ancient metal, sending flickering energy surging through its body. The Guardian staggered. Its form flickered wildly, struggling to stabilize. And then, for the first time, it spoke. "Trial. Recognized." The entire room shifted. The Guardian's form froze mid-motion, its body fading into nothingness as the chamber responded to its defeat. The walls pulsed with light, the ancient symbols glowing brighter, shifting, rearranging into something new. Darius exhaled, still gripping his rifle tightly. Did we just win? Xal'Rith wasn't sure. Victory didn't usually feel this. Uneasy. And then the voice returned. Worthy. The pedestal at the center of the room pulsed with energy. The protective field around the crown vanished, leaving it exposed for the first time in centuries. Xal'Rith stepped forward slowly. This was it. The artifact he had heard of in stories, the legend whispered through generations. A power that could reshape the fate of an empire. He reached out, and the moment his fingers touched the crown, everything changed. A surge of raw power tore through his body, forcing him to his knees. Visions flooded his mind. Flashes of battles long past, warriors who had come before him, rulers who had risen and fallen. He saw the first king, the one who had claimed the power before him, standing before an empire that had not yet crumbled beneath corruption. And then he saw what came after. The truth. This power, it was never meant to be held by any one ruler. It was a curse, a force that demanded war, conflict, dominance. The moment it was claimed, the bearer would become unstoppable, but at the cost of eternal conquest. A shackle disguised as a gift. Xal'Rith's eyes snapped open, his body trembling from the weight of revelation. He had come seeking strength, seeking a way to reclaim what had been stolen from him. But now he understood why no ruler before him had ever dared to wield this power. Because it was not meant to be controlled. Darius watched as Xal'Rith staggered to his feet, his hand still glowing faintly with the energy of the relic. The human frowned. What did you see? Xal'Rith clenched his fists, feeling the energy coursing through him, stronger than anything he had ever known. And yet, he felt afraid. "The truth," he said quietly. Darius narrowed his eyes. He had fought alongside Xal'Rith long enough to know when something was wrong. Before he could press further, a loud alarm suddenly echoed through the chamber. A voice, different from the one before, spoke. This one was not ancient, not part of the trial. It was a warning. Incoming life forms detected. Hostile signature confirmed. Darius tensed. That doesn't sound good. Xal'Rith turned toward the chamber's entrance, his expression dark. She found us. Darius cursed under his breath. The Queen. Of course, she had been watching. Of course, she would send something to stop them. The ground shook as the first explosions rocked the outer ruins. A deep, mechanical roar echoed through the halls, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Large, armored, fast. Darius checked his ammo. I hope that power of yours comes with a way out of here. Xal'Rith didn't answer. He didn't know. He had come searching for a way to reclaim his throne. Instead, he had found a power that could burn the entire galaxy to the ground. And now, the Queen's assassins were coming to take it from him, by force. The first explosion hit the outer wall with a deafening crash, the ground beneath their feet shaking violently as dust and stone fragments rained down from above. Darius staggered, grabbing hold of a nearby pillar to steady himself. His ears rang from the blast, and his heart raced as he tried to make sense of what was happening. The Queen's forces were closing in. Xal'Rith didn't flinch. He stood tall, his eyes focused, his hand still resting on the crown now lying before him on the pedestal. The strange energy from the relic pulsed around him, and for a moment, the air felt thicker, as if the very atmosphere had become charged with something powerful, almost malevolent. But his gaze remained steady. He had long ago learned to focus in the chaos of battle, but this was different. He could feel the weight of the decision that now lay before him. "They're here," Darius muttered under his breath, his grip tightening on his rifle. The sound of heavy footsteps grew louder, each step a resounding echo of metal against stone, each footfall bringing with it the promise of danger. It wasn't just the usual Varkathian soldiers or drones. These were elite warriors, the Queen's finest assassins, genetically enhanced, armored to the point of near invulnerability, and driven by a single purpose: eliminate anyone who stood in the way of their queen. Xal'Rith's eyes narrowed, his thoughts racing. The power of the crown was now in his hands, but he wasn't sure if he could control it. Every instinct in him screamed to embrace the strength, to use it to crush his enemies, to regain what had been taken from him. But the visions he had seen, the warnings from the relic, remained at the forefront of his mind. This power, once fully unleashed, would be uncontrollable. It was not simply a weapon. It was destruction incarnate. "I don't think we have much time," Darius said, his voice low but urgent. He stepped forward, eyes scanning the doorway where shadows now gathered, the first shapes of the incoming soldiers slowly taking form. "We can't hold this place forever." Xal'Rith didn't reply immediately. His hand hovered over the crown for a moment longer before he stepped back, turning to face Darius. The weight of the decision was heavy in his chest, but he knew what had to be done. "We won't hold this place at all," Xal'Rith said finally, his voice low but resolute. "But you're right. There's no way we're getting out of here alive unless we take the fight to them." Darius glanced at him, eyebrow raised. "You sure you're up for this? You look like you've just had the universe's worst hangover." Xal'Rith let out a humorless chuckle. "I'm not sure I have much choice anymore." He paused, looking around at the chamber once more. "The relic, it has shown me something. The power it holds can give us victory, but at a cost. The longer I wield it, the more I risk losing control. I need you to keep your distance, Darius." Darius blinked, surprised at the gravity in Xal'Rith's tone. "Control? What do you mean, lose control?" Xal'Rith's eyes flickered toward the crown once again. "It demands destruction. The more I use it, the more I become a force of nature, a war machine, untouchable, unstoppable. But that strength will consume everything around me, everything I once stood for. Darius frowned, but his grip on his rifle tightened. So you're saying you'll become a monster? Xal'Rith's expression darkened. I'm already a monster, but this will be worse. Darius opened his mouth to speak, but was cut off by the sound of heavy boots thundering in the distance. The assassins were almost upon them. He turned, assessing their numbers. Too many to fight head-on. It was a suicide mission if they stayed and fought. I'm not leaving without you, Darius said firmly, his eyes locking onto Xal'Rith's. Xal'Rith regarded him for a long moment. He could see the determination in Darius's eyes, the unshakable loyalty that had carried them both through countless battles. And yet, Xal'Rith knew what was coming, what he would become if he used the power of the relic. He had seen it in his visions, in the fractured memories of ancient kings who had lost themselves to the very strength they had sought to wield. He would tear apart everything, including the friend who now stood beside him. Stay out of my way, Xal'Rith said quietly, or you'll regret it. For the briefest moment, Darius considered arguing. He had always fought beside Xal'Rith, trusted him more than anyone. But this was different. With a grim nod, Darius stepped back. I'll trust you on this, old man. But I'm not letting you turn into one of those mindless monsters. Xal'Rith nodded, but it was clear from the tension in his shoulders that he knew what he was about to do might very well destroy them both. The first assassin appeared in the doorway, a massive figure clad in dark armor, its helmet glowing faintly with the light of advanced technology. It stood still for a moment, its head swiveling to survey the room. And then, without a word, it charged. Xal'Rith raised his hand. The air around him shuddered with energy as the relic's power surged, and suddenly, the world slowed. Time seemed to stretch, every movement sharp, every sound distorted. He could feel the current of power inside him, coursing through his veins like wildfire, a hunger that he could not quell. With a roar, he unleashed the energy. The ground beneath them cracked, the force of his power radiating outward in a shockwave that sent the assassin flying backward, crashing into the walls with a deafening crash. The entire room seemed to bend under the force, the stone groaning as it was pushed beyond its limits. For a moment, Xal'Rith stood still, his breath coming in heavy, labored gasps. The energy inside him was growing, filling him, and yet there was something deep inside him screaming to stop. But it was too late. A second assassin appeared, and then a third, each one heavier, each one stronger. But none of them were strong enough to stand against the full force of the crown's power. With each strike, Xal'Rith sent them flying, tearing through stone and steel, as if they were little more than paper. But even as the assassins fell, another dark truth rose within him. With each use of the power, he could feel his mind slipping. The urges to destroy, to crush, to obliterate were growing stronger. He could feel his humanity slipping away, his vision narrowing. Darius watched in awe, but his heart began to sink. This wasn't just power. This was destruction. Xal'Rith's body began to glow with an intense, unholy light, his features now indistinguishable as the power consumed him. He was no longer the king of Varkath, the man who had once ruled with honor. He was becoming something else, something far worse. I can't stop it, Xal'Rith whispered, barely able to hear his own voice over the deafening roar in his ears. I can't control it. Darius, seeing the state his friend was in, knew he had only one option left. He had to stop Xal'Rith before it was too late. But before he could act, the ground shuddered again. A new presence entered the chamber. And this one, unlike the others, wasn't an assassin. It was the queen. The queen's presence was unmistakable. Her aura, a chilling mix of authority and power, filled the room as she entered, her steps deliberate, measured, each one echoing across the shattered stone like a herald of doom. The light from the glowing relic flickered and seemed to dim in her presence, the energy around Xal'Rith reacting as though it recognized her, a reminder of the ties that bound her to the very power he now wielded. Seraveth, the Varkathian queen, was no longer the figure of elegance she once was. Her eyes, once cool and calculating, now glinted with the sharpness of someone who had tasted power and could not imagine living without it. She was dressed in dark, obsidian armor, an ethereal cloak flowing around her like smoke, her presence as commanding as a tempest. Every inch of her radiated a sense of inevitability, a certainty that she, and only she, would control the fate of the Varkathian Dominion. Xal'Rith's hand was still outstretched, crackling with power as he fought to maintain some semblance of control. The force of the relic was like an ocean inside him, relentless and overwhelming. Its tides pushing against his will, trying to drown his thoughts. But Seraveth's arrival had broken the fragile calm he had maintained. It was as if the relic recognized her as a threat, or perhaps as its true master, and in response, it surged with even more fury, feeding into Xal'Rith's body, urging him to unleash destruction. Darius, still reeling from the raw power that had just ripped through the assassins like a storm, knew this was the moment everything changed. He had seen the transformation in Xal'Rith, the way the crown's power was consuming him, twisting him into something that was no longer recognizable. The man he had fought alongside, the friend he had trusted, was slipping away, his humanity fading, replaced by something darker, more destructive. And now, with Seraveth standing before them, he knew that their time was running out. Seraveth's lips curved into a slow, almost imperceptible smile as she gazed at Xal'Rith. It was a smile that spoke of victory, of a long-awaited triumph. "You should never have returned, Xal'Rith," she said, her voice smooth, rich with contempt. "You were always a tool, a weapon to be discarded once you had outlived your usefulness." Xal'Rith, his breath shallow, tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. His hand trembled as he grasped the crown tighter, the energy crackling wildly around him. The crown was alive, pulling at his very soul, urging him to claim everything, to take everything that was once his, and more. "I thought you were smarter than this." Seraveth took a step closer, her gaze never leaving him. "You always did have a weakness for power, and now you've become it." The air between them thickened with tension, a dangerous undercurrent of emotion swirling beneath the surface. Darius could feel it, the growing storm of raw power that seemed to rise from both of them. Xal'Rith, once a king, was now a beacon of destruction, and Seraveth, the queen, stood like a force of nature ready to claim it all. But she wasn't looking at him as a defeated king anymore. She was looking at him as a rival. Xal'Rith's chest heaved as he tried to find some semblance of his old self, the man who had ruled with a vision, a balance between strength and compassion. But the crown, the cursed artifact, had stolen that from him. It had broken him, and now it was turning him into something worse. Seraveth stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she saw the conflict in him. She could see the struggle, the flickering remnants of the man she had once loved, now overwhelmed by the power he had sought to control. But she didn't care for that man anymore. The only thing that mattered now was the power. "You've become a slave to it." Her voice was almost a whisper, but there was no kindness in it, only cold, calculated triumph. "And now you'll serve me." Xal'Rith's eyes snapped to hers, filled with a rage that burned brighter than any star. But it wasn't enough. The power inside him was too great, too overwhelming. His own thoughts were lost in the maelstrom of energy, and he could feel the crown seeping into his very mind, pulling him toward the abyss. The room began to tremble again. The walls cracked, and the ground split beneath their feet. Xal'Rith could feel the relic's power rising, and he fought it, tried to wrest control, but it was no use. The destruction was already happening. The floodgates had opened. Seraveth tilted her head slightly, her expression still unreadable, watching as Xal'Rith struggled against the power that had consumed him. "You're no longer the king of Varkath." She stepped forward, her hand raised, and for the first time, A hint of real emotion flashed in her eyes. "You're just a weapon." In that moment, something snapped inside Xal'Rith. He roared, a sound that shook the very foundations of the chamber. The energy inside him surged to a new terrifying level, the crown's power ripping through his body as if it were trying to tear him apart. But instead of being consumed by it, he fought back. "I will not be your tool." His voice was thunderous, shaking the air itself as the energy poured from him, wild and uncontrollable. He reached out, sending a pulse of energy directly toward Seraveth. She didn't even flinch. The pulse of power stopped midair, hovering as if held by an invisible force. The energy warped, twisting around her like a serpent coiling itself in the air. And then, with a sharp flick of her wrist, she deflected it. The wave of force crashed into the walls of the chamber, sending a shockwave of destruction through the entire structure. Xal'Rith staggered back, his body trembling with the effort of maintaining control. But it was slipping. Fast. Seraveth smiled, watching him with growing amusement. "You never understood, did you?" she said softly. "This was always about power, Xal'Rith. Power that you couldn't control. Power that I knew would destroy you." Xal'Rith was panting, the crown now glowing with a malevolent light. His hands were shaking violently as he tried to keep it from consuming him completely. But he knew now, with the chilling certainty that only the dying could understand, there was no way out. And in that instant, the ground shattered beneath him, and the world around him seemed to collapse. Seraveth had already moved, faster than he could react. She was at his side in an instant, her hand snaking around his neck, pulling him toward her. The crown, now glowing brighter than ever, roared with power, but it couldn't stop what was about to happen. Xal'Rith looked into her eyes, and for the first time in years, he understood. She had won, and he had no choice but to serve her. The chamber was silent now, save for the distant rumblings of a collapsing world, the ruins of a once proud empire crumbling beneath the weight of betrayal and unchecked power. Xal'Rith stood motionless, his breath shallow, his limbs heavy as if the very gravity of the situation had grown too intense to bear. The crown, still nestled within his grip, pulsed with an eerie glow, its power now fully absorbed into his being. The relic that had once promised victory had now claimed him, body and soul. Seraveth stood before him, her eyes cold and calculating, the faintest smile curling at the corner of her lips. She looked almost regal, standing in the midst of the ruin, her obsidian armor reflecting the dim light of the dying chamber. Her gaze was not one of triumph, but of ownership, as if the very victory she had achieved was something inevitable, something long foreseen. "I told you, Xal'Rith," Seraveth said, her voice carrying a quiet, lethal certainty. "You were always meant to serve me. The crown was always mine to command." Xal'Rith did not answer. He could barely think, his mind clouded with the overwhelming torrent of power that surged through him. He had come to reclaim his throne, to restore the balance, but now all that remained was this, a hollow shell of the man he once was. The very thing he had fought for, the strength he had sought, had consumed him, and in the end, it had made him weak. He had become nothing more than a puppet of fate, a pawn in a game he thought he could control. Seraveth reached forward, placing her hand on his shoulder, her fingers cold and firm against his skin. For a moment, he felt the weight of her touch, as though she were tethering him to the present, holding him in place for something much worse than death. "You're mine now, Xal'Rith." Her words were soft, but they cut deep, carrying the authority of someone who had won. "No matter how much you struggle, no matter how much you resist, you will always be bound to me." He wanted to shout, to scream, to rip the world apart. He wanted to fight her, to fight the crown, to fight everything. But deep down, he knew that any effort would be futile. The power he had gained was too much to control. The visions, the overwhelming need to dominate, had consumed him. The warlord he had once been, the king who had ruled with honor and compassion, was gone. In his place stood a shadow, a tool for destruction. "You think I don't see it." Seraveth's voice was quiet, but it held a cruel edge, slicing through his fractured thoughts. "The way you're fighting it, the way you still think there's a part of you left." Xal'Rith's chest heaved, his breath ragged. The crown seemed to hum with energy, its power coursing through his veins like poison. And yet, a small part of him, a tiny sliver of the man he once was, refused to fade. He had to fight it. "You?" Xal'Rith rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "You won't have me." Seraveth laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "I already do, Xal'Rith. You're mine." She stepped closer, her presence an immovable force as she stared into his eyes, her gaze unblinking. "The relic, the power, you can't escape it. You can't escape me." He tried to move, to break free of her grasp, but his body betrayed him. The energy surged once more, sending waves of agony through his muscles, his bones, his very soul. The power had become a part of him, a force that didn't care for his will, his desires. The crown pulsed with a vicious energy, as though urging him to give in. It had won. It had claimed him. He could feel it. Its hunger, its thirst for conquest. And yet, somewhere deep within him, that tiny spark of resistance still flickered. "I'm not like you, Seraveth," Xal'Rith managed to say, his voice trembling with the last remnants of defiance. "I never was." Her smile faltered, just for a moment, as if the word struck something she had long buried deep within herself. But it was fleeting, just a momentary flicker of something human beneath the surface of the monster she had become. "No," she shook her head, her tone dismissive. "You were always just a tool, a weapon. The power never belonged to you. You were never meant to lead." Xal'Rith closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her words pressing down on him, suffocating him. The power surged once more, and this time, he let it. He no longer fought it. He embraced it, knowing full well that by doing so, he was destroying himself. He could feel the change in himself. The man he had been was slipping away, leaving only the beast that the crown wanted him to be. His thoughts became clouded, fragmented, and the hunger inside him grew insatiable. He could feel Seraveth's presence, the warmth of her fingers on his shoulder. And yet, the only thing that consumed him now was the desire to destroy. The power swelled within him, and for the briefest of moments, he felt the overwhelming urge to strike her down, to claim everything for himself. But even as he thought it, a voice within him whispered one final truth. "If you kill her, there will be nothing left." The crown pulsed, and for an instant, he saw it. He saw the future laid before him, a future of chaos, of endless war. He would become the very thing he had sworn to destroy. The king he had once been would fade away entirely, consumed by the power of the relic, and in his place there would be nothing but a monster, a conqueror with no master but the hunger for more. And just as the crown began to take full hold, just as Xal'Rith felt himself vanish into the power that had claimed him, he let go. The room seemed to still. Time itself slowed as Xal'Rith fought against the crown's final push, rejecting it with the last ounce of strength he had. His mind, once clouded, cleared for a brief, precious moment. He looked into Seraveth's eyes, those cold, cruel eyes, and for the first time, he saw the truth of her. She was afraid. She had always been afraid. But it was too late. The crown had already won. With a final, shuddering breath, Xal'Rith reached up, gripping the relic, and with all the strength he had left, he tore it off his head. The power within him exploded. The world around him fractured as the relic's energy ripped through him like a storm, tearing apart everything in its path. The walls of the chamber crumbled, and the air turned to fire, a flash of light so bright it threatened to blind them both. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The Xal'Rith collapsed to his knees, his body trembling with exhaustion, the crown now lying forgotten in the rubble. Seraveth stood before him, her face a mixture of confusion and disbelief. She had lost. But Xal'Rith, in that moment, knew what he had done. He had freed himself, and with it he had freed his people, even if the cost was his very soul.